All right, there we go. Had a little bit of a slight delay there in getting on the air. It's called Set Up the Stream, Michi. Been doing too busy in show prep here, including going out into the rain. I'll explain that in just a moment or two. And I do hear myself coming back, so that tells me that it works. And good morning from Riverton, wherever you're watching this monstrosity. Glad to have you with us here for a Friday edition of an REC Live. Normally we do these on Thursdays, but there was just way too much going on. Right now I'm in the process of working on REC's positions in the AM digital NPRM that's going on right now. And we've got a couple other big things that we're working on right now, as well as the renewals. I've been getting a flood of renewal requests. So thank you for your support. Seriously, for those of you who I thank you. I mean, this is literally this is literally what keeps the food on the table here. Because I'm not. This is not Dutrell. We don't make the big bucks here. Our toilet does not have gold-plated fixtures. Actually, it's a leaking toilet. Okay, sometimes it's like, so yeah, and we raise our own chickens to eat our own eggs. So, there you go. That's kind of where we're at. Well, I'll tell you right now, we're not totally off the grid or any of that stuff, So we have at least one thing about living out here. Even though we're in a rural area, we've got fairly good broadband service. Now, of course, the company that's behind it sucks, Comcast. But overall, the net has been, we get some fairly fast internet out here. Now, of course, it bumps. Last week with the FCC meeting, that thing was bumping like a BB in a boxcar. But, we were still there. Head on over into the chat and feel free to drop something in the chat. Let me see if I can do this right. Drop it. No! I screwed that up again. Drop it into the chat and it will come down here. And we'll see it. We'll see it. And, and maybe if you're lucky, you will derail the Michi. Derail a Michi. That's what it's all about. Watching my picture come back on the delay. Horrible. All right, let's get into the normal business here. Let's look at the renewals. So far, if we're doing pretty good this time on the LPFM renewals, at least for Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. We are down to just those few stations, so 9 stations to go. And these stations, they're past the ultimatum date. So if these stations do file, they still run the risk that they may get a forfeiture. So that's something, so that's pretty much, but a little forfeiture is better than losing the whole license. I mean, unless you want to go down, and if you do, I mean, if you want to, obviously we would hope that you would have reached out and tried to get your station assigned to another organization well in advance of this renewal window, and got that taken care of if you no longer have the interest in it. But if you if you need to surrender your license, which is a last resort, just let staff know and just go ahead and do it. And that'll help staff. Now, the FCC did send out the final notice on those 9 stations down there in the corner for Alaska and Georgia. those are in, those have less than a month to file. And they really, if those stations are around, they need to file. Otherwise, they're going to go. They're going to be a statistic. And we try, we try our best here to try to encourage LPFM stations to, stay on the air, do what they can, and of course, keeping in mind that not every LPFM station out there is a community-minded, what would fit under the community radio. We have some folks out there, and unfortunately, some folks that are basically just pirate radio stations with a license. There's a case of that going on right now in Florida. Big fight right now in Florida against in the Fort Myers area, I believe, with WSGDLP. They are running. They are alleged to be running right now over 500 watts of TPO from their transmitter. And they've gotten the irk of another translator that's down there. And so what did the LP do? They went ahead and filed a police report and said that somebody from the FCC broke into the tower site. It's really bad. We've had some pirate issues in the Fort Myers area during the window. We had one applicant that was dismissed because of violation, because a police report came out that they were engaged in pirate radio operation in violation of the Florida state law. So, this is again why I say that not all, LPFM stations are not above the law. You have to take each case individually and understand that there's a lot of bad apples out there. Now, there's a lot of good apples too. Even in Florida, where there's a lot of bad apples, there's good apples in Florida. So, but Florida seems to, again, I'm going to say this again, Florida for some reason just seems to be a cancer for bad LPFM, and I really think a lot of it has to do with the pirate culture that has arisen there over the years. And at least we could say one thing about AM revitalization and the LPFM window is that it has mellowed down the pirate activity in southern Florida because of the lack of available channels. So that's where we're at on that. Anywho, we are currently getting ready for Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And right now, 14% of the LPFMs have filed their renewals. If you're going to file through REC, just understand that we don't file renewals here until the 17th of the month at least. And the reason for that is because of the pre-file announcements. Your last pre-file announcement will be on the 16th. And then after the 16th, your last that would be your last your last messages, and so that's why we file then. Keeping in mind that if there's been any changes to your station from the questions that are on there, mainly if you go silent, if you go silent, you have to amend your renewal application and make sure that they know that you're silent. Even if you don't file a silent with the FCC, since technically LPFMs are not required to do so, you do so out of courtesy, but not out of requirement. And of course, that brings up that also brings up questions too. Is what will happen if how does the FCC enforce that with the LPFMs? And really, the only way they can enforce that is through complaints. If they receive a complaint that a station's been off the air for more than a year, the FCC will send out a letter of an operational status inquiry, or an OSI, and the station, the licensee, will have to provide solid evidence such as electric bills, EAS logs, etc., to prove that the station has been on the air within the last 365 days. So there you go. Again, if you need to file this month, EasyForm is open, easyform.recnet.net. REC charges $100 for renewals. If you miss that date, it's okay to file a little late. Usually the FCC gives a grace period of about 30 days. However, please do yourself a favor, do the service a favor, get those renewals in on time. It really doesn't take much. If you want me to do it, that's why I'm so cheap on this one. That's why it's $100 instead of $150 or $350, because it's a fairly easy task to do. And I even have a video online on this YouTube channel to talk, to run you through doing a renewal for an LPFM. So that's where we're at on that. Feel free to join us in the chat. Feel free to join us there, because that's, we have that up for a reason. And we'd love to hear your comments on various things. So feel free to drop those in the chat, questions. Let's talk about what's coming up on Monday. Is the comment deadline for the All Digital AM. And, here we go with that information right up there. These are the main touch points in the notice of proposed rulemaking. Audio quality is, will the listening experience on digital AM be better than analog AM? Obviously, there would be a definite improvement. Auxiliary data, which is like your RDS, what things could what kind of data could be sent through there, title and artist, or is it going to go to a point of where we get to things like album art maybe, or news emergency alerts and stuff like that? What can go through that auxiliary data? Signal coverage. We've already seen a few reports, informal reports, and some formal reports from the WWFD operation as far as where the signal is being heard. Things that I've read actually would suggest that the digital AM actually gets a little bit better coverage than, outside of its designated contours than non-digital AM with an analog. Now, the one feature of the IBOC, or not the IBOC, it's the on-channel, that's all digital, this MA3 mode, is that there is still a very narrow unmodulated carrier, which is the center reference frequency. And under the MA3 mask, that unmodulated carrier is at the actual assigned power of the station, so 5 kW, 1 kW, whatever. And then the two sidebands are suppressed, and that would be where your digital signal is. Now that is a little different, I believe, than for example DRM, where DRM there is no I don't believe there's an unmodulated carrier. I believe it's just a digital signal there. And the interesting thing is that in the DRM world, really, you can cut your output power by about to like 1/5, 1/4 to 1/5 of what your normal analog power is. Because normally, 50,000 watt analog can be replicated by a 10 kilowatt DRM transmitter. This is happening on shortwave. The FCC even allows a 10 kilowatt minimum for DRM shortwave transmitters in the U.S. International Broadcasting Service. So we go on to energy efficiency. This is one I've been asking about, is especially for the small mom and pop stations. Does this AM digital MA3, is it more efficient to operate one of these facilities? Let's say you've got a 1 kW Class C station with a good coverage translator, with a small town with a 250 watt translator, non-directional, somewhere up on a nearby mountain, and you've got this little Class C station running 1 kW, probably somewhere in like Kentucky or Tennessee, somewhere where there's really bad ground conductivity. Is that station going to benefit from an energy cost if they were to switch to a 1 kW HD station, and with the majority of their listeners listening on the translator anyway? That would be one of the points that I would be thinking about on this, and I would love to hear from Nautel, from Xperi, from the manufacturers and such. How would that work? Spectrum efficiency, I think we talked a little bit about that with signal coverage and such, as how efficient is the spectrum, but also too, this also lines up with the interference and the emissions masks, and this has to do with the the old MA1 digital AM was a joke. I will say it, and I think anybody with a pulse whoever experienced it in any way, shape, or form will say it. There's just too much interference. In those first adjacent channels, it just was not usable at night. IBOC, hybrid did not work for AM. And but this is not your father's IBOC. This is actually uses less bandwidth because there's no analog signal other than that narrow reference carrier in the middle. That depends, that the sidebands, that the digital sidebands have to ride up against. So there is some spectrum efficiency there. Interference, of course, the big issue is going to be there is nighttime interference, digital to analog. That's going to be an issue, I think. I think that's going to be an issue for listeners, especially those who are dependent on a nighttime service. And there just happens to be, a Class D station with 8 watts that seems to be reaking its ugly head in there if it's running digital. Power limits, should a 5 kW station stay a 5 kW station? What should they, what would that be? If it's determined that the coverage, if it takes maybe 3.5 kW to replicate a 5 kW signal in digital, then perhaps there may be some power reductions if you go all digital. Impacts to the emergency alert system. Now, this is one that I brought up. I brought up some of this Because my concern is that, and I see this from a rural listener standpoint, and I see this from, if you're out in the rurals, or you're out somewhere, and yeah, you may get some FM coverage, but really you're one of those few that are still dependent on AM ground wave during the day and AM skywave at night. What if there was something that you needed to get in that required, and I'm talking about both local and national emergencies. There needs to still be an infrastructure of analog AM stations, kind of like I don't want to call it a nightlight. I guess you could call it a nightlight. As somebody else pointed out in a conversation on this recently, kind of like a domestic shortwave, but using AM. So bottom line is that this brings up the one question I'll be asking is, should Class A stations, the clear channel Class A stations, as well as maybe the clear channel, the B stations that also run on clear channels, should they be allowed to go all digital? And I see this from an emergency and from a national security standpoint. I feel like we still need to have a baseline analog infrastructure in there. Digital AM is fine and dandy for saving the small stations. I don't think I think this is just another Band-Aid solution, though, even for the small stations. We'll talk about what I think we should do on the long term in just a bit. Impacts to travelers' information stations, the little 10-watt stations that operate with a slightly narrow bandwidth compared to a regular AM station. And that goes back to the interference issue, and that's the digital into analog, and how that's going to affect the usability of TIS stations. I really don't think that it will, per se. It's going to impact TIS just like it impacts any other stations. The licensing costs is brought up in the NPR. Another issue that I kind of touched on too. And the question is what is Xperi going to be charging for these stations, and is it going to be within a small station's best interest to convert to a digital facility, which may usually mean having to switch transmitters, going to a Nautel branded transmitter, for example, and then buying all the digital stuff to make that work. And then you got to throw the licensing in there. So yeah, there's an investment there. Impacts on listeners. Again, this goes back to, is there already a fallback in place? Is there already an FM translator for an AM station where the FM transmitter is dominating has the bigger share of the listeners than the AM? Again, I see this most effective in the case of a small AM station in the middle of Kentucky with a really bad ground conductivity, a Class C non-directional 1 kW station that has a 250 watt translator on the local hilltop. I work with a couple stations that are in that situation, and I think that they might be good candidates for this. The question, of course, comes up is, how many people are still listening to the AM? The other thing is that you still got your older listeners. They've always listened on AM, and they don't want to adapt. Now, of course, that's an argument for keeping and preserving AM. But again, will that audience be there? Will that AM audience be there in 5 years, 10 years? Those of us who were brought up in earlier generations, we have a little more tolerance for things than the younger generations. You know, those of us who've driven across country, before there was a Sirius radio, before there was XM, and, and during that time when, you just got sick of just listening to the few 8 tracks that you had in the car, you obviously turned on the radio, and it was usually at night. And so you'd turn around on AM and you'd find something, and then you're driving by the high tension wires and bzzz, that's this generation. That would be my generation, and that would be the so-called boomer generation. I mean, this is what they that's these generations. We're used to that. The question is are the younger folks, are the younger Generation X folks, the millennials, are they even going to even consider an AM radio, even if we put all this digital stuff on there? And, that, of course, brings us up to receiver availability. Receiver availability is, first of all, not all the digital radios that are being sold right now have AM capability. The ones that Best Buy sell do not. And also, too, because, there's still issues with the electric cars, the electric and hybrid cars that normally don't come with an AM radio, not because they don't want to embrace AM. It's because of the electrical systems in those cars put too much noise in the MF spectrum that it would render at least an analog AM useless. Now, the question would come up then is, and the question I would raise to the manufacturers is, how well will AM digital get through the very localized noise of automobile systems? That is a big thing. Because if that is not addressed, and if that's still an issue, you forget about this. You got states like California that are trying to push to get the alternative fuel and alternative fuel vehicles and the electric cars and such like that. There's a big push right now for the alternative energies. And if you can't use an AM radio, why have an AM station? So that's the thing. And then also consumer acceptance. Any time that you make a change, it's going to result in somebody having to buy a new piece of hardware. We already went through the digital TV. We went through digital TV. And digital TV, there was a huge advantage for the consumer as well as a public interest. For the consumer, it was a much nicer picture, although albeit pixelated at first, where you could actually see the path of the football going over the field. You saw the you saw the stuff about So anyway, I got derailed there slightly by the chat. Digital TV, there was definitely a public outcry for that from a viewer standpoint, as well as from a public interest standpoint, including the public safety, the recovery of spectrum for public safety, as well as the commercial services that went into that spectrum that's continuing to grow. And now we've got the 600 megahertz spectrum. TV channels are only up to like 36 now. We come a long way. I mean, we come a long way from 83, and now we're down to 36. We've definitely come a long way in history over that issue. And so, I mean, the other one, of course, is the AM expansion. That was actually very simple. All the new AM radios that have come out will have 1610. We'll be able to tune 1610 to 1700. And So that's what we've got there. Um, and the question, of course, comes up now is you look at the FM digital situation right now. There's no public outcry for it, and so there's not this big rush to go out and buy an FM HD radio. The new car manufacturers are putting HD radios in, not that much, but they're still putting them in. We're seeing situations where the HD radios are going in at the factory, but they reach the dealer with the HD disabled, and you have to actually go in and reprogram the radio to turn on the HD. That's kind of silly. That is kind of silly. And now with television, the big push is on for ATSC3, which is going to be another forced purchase. Um, the excitement for ATSC3, though, in my opinion, is not quite there like it was with ATSC1. And ATSC3 is the next generation TV that's currently being trialed in Phoenix and a couple other places. And one of the things is I'm hoping to get to NAB this year because I'd like to learn more about it and some of the technologies behind that. Now, of course, we're going to talk about NAB and other major public gatherings in that. So, but for right now, let's quickly check the chat here and see if there's any talk on stuff here. Al Davis, how well will digital get past noise? Depends on the code. It can be whatever you want. The designers of the code get to choose the trade-offs. Good point. That's the big question is how would that work? How would that be handled? Like, for example, I've got a what is this, a 1998, I think it is a 1998 Silverado pickup, which is barely running, but there's like a few spot frequencies on AM that thing is just giving me all kinds of noise. Just local carriers that are obviously coming from some of the vehicle systems. And but in my Subaru, I've got a fairly clear AM as long as I'm not near any power lines. So it all depends on the vehicle. And with with the stories that I've heard with the electric vehicles, the Teslas and such, those vehicles are just not. There's too many systems, I guess, in them that really are causing problems with the MF band. So it'll be interesting to see how AM digital, if AM digital is even capable of getting through that. So and the idea, we're here to preserve radio. We're here to preserve radio. Radio needs to still be available. Yes, there is streaming. There is all kinds of non-radio out there. But are we going to let non-radio win? Radio is the original app, and I will always defend radio over non-radio, and I will not give up to streaming. From that perspective, there always needs to be some form of terrestrial broadcasting, whether it's analog, digital. There needs to be some form of an analog, some form of a terrestrial broadcast. Let's see. Joe says it won't get through all. It won't get through at all. Look at the digital TV on the low band. The noise makes the channels almost impossible to use. So what do you think all that noise on AM is going to do to a digital? I've heard a little different on the ambient MF, noise in the medium wave bands and such, and that the digital does do better with, is able to get through that better than the analog is. And again, this is going to take testing, and there has been some testing. I think what it is that the NPR labs and them need to come clean with what's going on. Now, this week we had this late this week in preparation of working on the AM digitalization NPRM. I did put out a little infographic to suggest, which is this is something that has been on REC's plate for like more than 15 years now, and that is the reallocation of TV channels 5 and 6 for the use of the expansion of the AM broadcast band. Now, of course, all the normal arguments came up. People won't go out and buy a new radio. People won't do this. People won't do that. And I mean, there's plenty of arguments both for and against. I could say, hey, yeah. However, if people know that your content is moving, and if you are doing something more than just what a normal, just more than just some of these mainstream iHeart and Cumulus-owned AM stations are doing, and running more than running syndicated talk, especially if you're a minority station operating a minority language, and you could attract. I think you could attract buyers of radios to continue to listen, or to listen in a better quality. That's where I feel that that's where I feel that there is some opportunity there. Lack of radios. They don't make them in the they don't sell them in the U.S. Yeah, but they sell them in other places, and they can be here faster than you wouldn't believe. The radios will, it's a big burden on the manufacturers. A lot of these is just firmware. A lot of these radios are already equipped to receive these bands, and it just happens to be the firmware that gets sent out to the U.S. and Western markets. That doesn't happen. I mean, I've already put on there a whole list of receivers that are capable of picking up FM wide. The only firmware modification that would have to be made is 10 kilohertz spacing instead of 9 on AM, and 200 kilohertz spacing on FM. And who knows? That's probably already in the firmware. It's probably already there. It's probably just a it's probably just a like the old thing. Used to cut a resistor, and that would suddenly open up, or cut a jumper, and that would suddenly open up new capabilities. Anybody remember modifying a CB radio to work on those funny channels? Yeah, kind of in the same light there. Al Davis says a digital TV is a good example of a bad codec choice. Yeah. When I was in Japan, I had a chance to experience over-the-air ISDBT, which is their digital television system that's also being used in Brazil. Brazil also uses ISDBT, I believe. And yeah, much better, even much better picture quality. It's kind of like back in the analog days, when you lived in the U.S., you're used to seeing NTSC at 525 lines, and then you make that trip out to Europe, and you're watching TV out there on 605 lines. I think, was it 605? Was it 605 or 655? 600 something lines of PAL. Big difference. Unfortunately, the one thing I never got to experience when going out to Europe was the old 405 line system, the old 405 line monochrome system with the FM video and the AM, and the AM audio. I never got a chance to experience that. Now, one of the concepts I've thrown in there is the idea. And again, this is the idea I've been working with for many years now, and the thought is why not expand the band? Why can't? Whoops, that's not the right slate. Let's go to that one. What if we were to expand the band? This is what I see. I see a long-term solution for smaller AM stations, And the idea is there's down in the channel 5, channel 6 spectrum, which is currently in Japan. This is their primary FM broadcast band is 76 to 90. They just extended it to 95, and they've been marketing the hell out of radios that tune 76 to 108. When I was in Japan a couple years ago, yeah, there was aggressive marketing, both on the air and in the stores. There's still a lot of, unlike in America, there's still a lot of brick and mortar in Japan. And they were really promoting the wide FM there. And, it's to the point now where the AM stations are now asking to be able to shut down their AM facilities and go strictly FM. Because they realize that's where people are going. So, for this for these upcoming comments, I did build some programs that are going to we put some rules in place that would that where we would assign an FM channel to a particular community of license, using using the normal allocation distance separations. We basically said, okay, for a 1 kW or less station, we'll assign a Class A. For a 1 kW, for a station greater than 1 kW, we'll do a Class C3. We did the assignment priority as Class C, then D, then B, with A's not being eligible, because remember, they're part of the national infrastructure. And then what we did was in the D and the B stations, we also did those in order of kW going upwards. So the lower powered stations, the lower powered Class B, Class D's, and then the lower powered Class B's had priority. And then if two stations had the same power levels, then we used population in a descending order. So the more populated area would be looked at first. So those were the basic rules that we used. And the concept here is that this would be primary service, and the idea is that eventually over time, AM stations would be able to turn off their AMs, go here and go primary. There's people in the AM movement that want primary. They want translators to be primary. 250 watts with inside someone else's interfering contour. Not exactly a good primary prospect. Not to mention, it's also a violation of Local Community Radio Act. So what we did was we put in some protection for the TV stations. And, so like, for example, this would be Channel 6. These are the only Channel 6 stations in the country right now. There's only 10 of them in the U.S. and, a few along the Canadian border. That's it. Now, I haven't done one of these maps for Channel 5 yet. Channel 5 is actually has, what did we say, 20 stations across the country are currently on Channel 5. So we have 10 on Channel 6, 20 on Channel 5. So domestically, we're having to protect 30 stations. And as we could see here, we've come up with about 3,000 stations, about 66% of the AM stations out there with protection, with overprotection to the Channel 5 and 6 stations. That would be, that we could assign an allotment to. I mean, that's just, like I said, this is just a quick run report. If you've been following my FCC filings over the years on LPFM, on various other things, I always like to quantify data, and I will always include raw data. So when you see comments that come from REC Networks, chances are there's like a 50-page attachment or 30-page attachment with nothing but data in there. And that's what we're doing. We're quantifying. We're just not saying, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to cover 66%. Well, here, we're going to put the money where our mouth is. And there we go. So, honestly, it'll probably never happen. but because our current industry, the NAB, and the regulators are more interested in Band-Aid plans. And Joe, of course, says that does not give any protection to LPTVs. LPTV is secondary. This is primary service we're talking about. We're talking about eliminating an AM facility, taking somebody out of the MF band and moving them to FM. And that would be their sole allotment. That would be their 312G sole allotment for a station. And so, yeah, that would be a primary service. I mean, still to this day, in a lot of these areas, a Channel 6 could move into town. A full service Channel 6 could move in and displace the LPTVs. We just had a Channel 5 just recently come around. Again, it's just like LPFM. It's secondary service. LPFM, we're going through the same thing. If there's a channel, and then somebody decides, and especially, and this is what I was worried about with the upcoming windows and the release, and the elimination of the Channel 6 protection rules for the 88 to 92s, is the FCC originally wanted to do the LPFM window first. And this would be post changes in the rules, so the elimination of the Channel 6 protection rules. They wanted to put LPFMs in first. And so that would mean that there would be a large number of channels that will be available across the country in various places down below 92 that weren't available before. And so now we're going to stick LPFM stations in there. LPFM stations are going to have applied. They're in the process of getting their applications granted, or they're going through the MX process. And then all of a sudden, the FCC drops in a window for new NCE stations in the same band. And suddenly all these LPFM stations are squashed, and they may have no other place to go. So they've invested time. They've possibly invested money, especially if they have a granted construction. They were Singleton, and they're already granted. So these are the issues, and so that's why I said to staff, and I said, we got to do the full service window first. Let the full service have the dibs in that spectrum, and we know that there's going to be spectrum that that they're not going to want, and then we come in and we follow that up with the LPFM window. And of course, the LPFM window is for all 100 channels, not just for those 20, where the NCE window is just for 20 channels. So, that's basically what it is there. But still, if you have an LPFM station in a small community, and somebody decides, okay, we're going to put in a petition for rulemaking to drop an allotment in in the community, and the 70 dB contour overlaps your interfering contour, therefore it's technically interference. It's technically 73,809 interference that could subject you to displacement. That is, again, that's the nature of secondary service. Your guest's on the dial, and if somebody else, if a primary service needs to come in, guess what? You got to move out of the way. Same goes with LPTV. Again, it's secondary versus primary. This is the whole reason why many years ago we had that whole Class A TV stuff. Was because of the digital conversion, because of the need of the companion channels, the LPTV stations that were actually providing were providing real public service and not just satellites of shopping channels, were able to get Class A protection, and that came from Congress. That came from Congress. as part of a series of bills around the digital television conversion. So, and even that, they're still not a full primary station in many ways. But they are a lot. They are kind of like a halfway between secondary and primary. They're kind of like a step down primary station. And those are the Class A's. And so obviously they were protected through this process. They're still protected. They were represented in the repack. Unfortunately, the stations that were true LPTVs that were never eligible for Class A, they're the ones that are secondary. No different than a TV translator. Back in the old days, we had the TV translators all over the place. They were secondary. So, and let's see, WFPN asking about does extended AFM excludes LPFM license up? We're not even talking about that right now. Obviously, if there was ever such a band, then yeah, perhaps there would be opportunities for LPFM in there, or some kind of lower powered community broadcasting, whether it would be whether it would be under the realm of LPFM, under the realm of non-commercial, under the realm of but the idea is that we're looking at 60 channels, and again it's too premature to address LPFM down below 88. Now, there are some folks out there that say, well, why don't you take a section of the band and make that LPFM, and make a section of the band and make that, everybody AM stations. And I say, no, that will not work in a lot of cases, because number one is that if we still have to protect the 30 TV stations that are primary, that will reduce availability even more. A couple other things that are built into my program that we're going to be releasing the allotment tables for in comments is it takes into consideration stations near the border. We actually share the borders, and the program will automatically, if you're less than 150 kilometers from Canada or Mexico, the 30 channels that may be available are reduced down to 15, because the idea is it's border sharing. So border sharing is taken into consideration. This is what we do when we plan spectrum. And again, this is pie in the sky ideas. But it's something for people to think about, that we need to stop using Band-Aids. Translators for AM stations, secondary translators, are a Band-Aid. So is this AM digital. That's a Band-Aid. I think that the FCC needs to, and the broadcasters need to have a long-term plan. And the long-term plan is to get the F out of MF and move up the band into VHF somewhere. I mean, that's where we can go with that. Some folks have said, well, why don't we get European-style DAB here? And the full-blown DAB would not work too well here, because unlike in Europe, we don't have one company or organization running the transmitters, and then different organizations being licensed to put programming on those transmitters. Our structure does not work that way in America. And there are micro DAB solutions that would work. The problem is the spectrum. Where do we put them? Low band VHF is not suitable for DAB. And so what's going to happen is that and Canada has already proven that L band going up to like 1.4 gigs, that's not going to work. The only real place to put DAB is in the VHF high spectrum, somewhere between like 174 and 200 something. The European DAB is up around like 220, 230. The problem is that in Region 2 here in North America, that is used for government, that is used for national defense, that is used for military aviation. Joe says, pie in the sky, more like Lucy in the sky with diamonds. um, you know how long it's been since it's been about, maybe about, would have been about 1991, 92 maybe? Yeah, maybe about 1992. About 1991, 1992 since there was Lucy in the sky with diamonds as far as I'm concerned. Those were the days. Those were the days. And you know, we still had fun. And look at me now. Look at me now. I'm still psycho, and I'm loving it. So I mean, so that's kind of the idea is to look at, you know, look at a long-term solution, no matter how pie in the sky it is or how Lucy in the sky and with diamonds it is. The bottom line is that really, as an industry, we need a long-term solution. Enough of the band-aids. You know, let's get people into one kind of equipment and get them going. You know, the nice part about it is that why give them this shoddy AM digital that only a few stations may take advantage of? And meanwhile, those stations are still paying for the land that AM station is sitting on that's probably worth more than the station, even if they go digital. And, you know, doesn't take a lot of land for an FM. Stick it on a, you know, plenty of towers out there to stick it on. You know, I mean, this whole issue with, you know, the AM stations, they just, you know, they were at the right place at the right time back in the time. But now that, you know, even you know, where people live now have changed a lot since those legacy AM stations were put in. Why don't we have, you know, this is why we need to look at other solutions. The current AM infrastructure is almost, not completely, but fairly obsolete. There are AM stations out there that are making billings. They are getting listeners on there. Well, guess what? They're taking 50,000 watts daytime to make that happen. And that's the problem is that the stations that are not making the money don't have the money and don't have the facilities to be able to compete with the 50,000 watt giants, the blowtorches. So we got to take those things into consideration. And of course, WFPN says, you know, the problem with the Northeast is the FM is already congested. No frequencies are available for future licenses. Yeah, that is fairly true. I mean, that whole entire corridor through New England down into, you know, southern New England down into the New York City area. That's really the nexus of frequencies spectrum congestion right there. Because, I mean, once you head out towards, you know, eastern Long Island, towards Sag Harbor, out that way, yeah, things start to clear up. As you head south, you're dealing with the whole New Jersey mess. And we could sit there and talk for a whole entire hour on New Jersey, their situation, the New Jersey Broadcasters Association, having to deal with them in MB Docket 19193. I mean, I could talk forever on that. But then you got the whole Philadelphia issue, and then you've got the Philadelphia, and then that starts to, and you know, coming down out of Philadelphia, coming down the Delmarva Peninsula, yeah, it starts to taper off. It starts to taper off a little bit. And I mean, there are green areas down here on the Delmarva Peninsula where you could still get an LPFM without a waiver. I mean, down the road from me in Mardella Springs is one place where that could take place. Where we're at here, we need a waiver. Here at Riverton, we'll need a waiver, and I've already got ideas on how to do a nice waiver from here. So we'll just have to see how that goes. And then you got the DC, the Baltimore, DC, the whole DMV area there, and then then it starts to taper off in all the different directions. But still, you've got that. Yeah, you're right here in this whole Eastern Seaboard, Mid-Atlantic, New England mess. And yeah, there is a lot of spectrum congestion here because there's a lot of people here. So it only makes sense to, look at alternative spectrum. And yeah, under the REC plan, channel 5, channel 6 may not be available in a lot of areas because of existing broadcast stations. And again, we're looking at plans that even displace those stations. So, if we had a full dial, if we had full spectrum availability, what would it look like? If there were no TV stations on channel 5 or 6 in the US or Canada or Mexico that we have to contend with, what would it look like if we were to try to move all the AM stations, there's many of the C, D, then B AM stations, off the AM broadcast band and finding a companion place for them on FM on a primary basis, either as a 6 kW Class A station or as a 25 kW, say Class C3 type station. What would that look like? What would that look like from an allocation perspective? And what opportunities would there be in there for, and then as a bonus, what opportunities would there be available for future low power use, maybe at a higher power, maybe at a 250 or 500 watt at 30 or 60 meter, maybe a 7 or 11, I would like to, right now on LPFM, we still have to decide, there's still this line between what is hyperlocal and what is not. And really, LPFM was designed for hyperlocal. And the NAB continues to argue 5.6 kilometers, about 3.5 miles radius, is hyperlocal. We're, of course, pushing for 7.1 contour with LP250. And, if we wanted to bring in something more like the translator rules, for example, the non-fill-in translator rules, out in the West, we could go for 13.3. Would a 13.3 still be considered a hyperlocal service? Considering what a full Class A is like 28. So, those are the questions. Those are the ethical questions that we have to look at. We have to look at where do we draw the line between hyperlocal and full service. Sometimes more power is not always better. And in some cases, the coverage may help. It'll help your building penetration. That's one of the big pushes we have on LP250. But that does not necessarily mean that you're going to suddenly have the moon and the stars. So just some things to think about there on that. Now, of course, we've been hearing a lot about the coronavirus, the COVID-19 stuff, and there's been a lot of questions coming up about events. It's pretty bad it's fairly bad in Japan right now, especially in Japan. They are playing baseball games with zero crowd. And if you have ever seen a Japanese baseball game, even if it's just clips on YouTube, the thought of a Japanese baseball game with no fans is surreal. It just is just I just can't even imagine that. And a couple years ago here in Baltimore, they had there were some protests and rioting or whatever going on around some police brutality issues, and they made a decision to hold a game at Camden Yards, which is the Baltimore Orioles, and to hold it with no fans. They weren't going to allow any fans in there, and they actually aired the game on television. That was very surreal to watch. I mean, even a spring training game had a bit more excitement than this. And spring training is on. Go Dodgers! I still, I may be out in Riverton right now, but I still bleed Dodger blue. So you've got you got a lot of events. A lot of events in that part of the world have been canceled. Now we're starting to see events getting canceled out here. Now, of course, REC, with our close connection with the Asian entertainment industries, we follow a lot of things going on, a lot of conventions, a are being canceled. A lot of the anime conventions and various Asian pop culture conventions. I even just read today that there was a kimono convention in this country that was canceled. So we're starting to see the cancellations coming. On the ham radio side, we're starting to see some events canceled. I have not heard anything yet about the Delaware State Convention here in Georgetown, Delaware. I haven't heard if there's been no news whether that's going to be canceled or not. Maryland just had 3 confirmed cases. Now, again, I don't know if that's on, I'm assuming that's on the western shore. I don't know if it's western or eastern. The state is not saying what's going on with that. So this brings up the question of a couple major things that are coming up. One would be the NAB in Las Vegas in mid-April. As of a couple days ago, the NAB still says that it's on. There's been a couple of vendors, a couple of exhibitors that have pulled out. There's been a few people that I've spoken with, who I contact on, who I work with, who are really reconsidering, or just have not even put in their, have not even started their arrangements to go. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Those who know me know that when I am set to go somewhere, I make my travel plans and everything early, especially with the airlines, because mainly I want my seat choices. I'm kind of picky on airline seats. I'm not one of these basic economy people. I will always try to choose a seat, especially on a transcon flight. Especially on a long distance, Philly to Los Angeles or Philly to Las Vegas. Yeah, there's only certain seats that I want, and I want to make sure that I get them. And so the airline tickets have already been bought. Now, of course, American Airlines is now screwing everybody and saying, hey, if you buy your ticket after March 1st or March whatever, it now has a cancellation policy that allows you to make a change without a fee. And then, but what about us who bought our tickets before the whole coronavirus scare? We had no way of knowing that this was going to happen. And so there's a lot of folks out there right now. And so what's going to hang with me would be is if I decided to cancel NAB, I'm going to be out at least $200 on a change fee, and I've got to use those tickets sometime within this year. I may just, if I do that, I may just reschedule and go to Southern California and visit my stations out there, visit the stations I work with out there. Maybe take a drive down to Bext, down in San Diego. We've had some. I've got an interesting Bext story here, and we'll have to talk about this if there's time or one of these times. Ricky's like, first class, of course. No, but I'll tell you the hack. There is a hack, though. If you buy, there's one flight on American Airlines that runs between Philadelphia and Los Angeles. It is on an A330, an Airbus A330. It's one that's in an international configuration. So therefore, the first 4 or 5 rows in coach are premium economy seats. Basically like the equivalent of an American first, of a domestic first class. A little smaller than a domestic first class. But still, it's a wider seat than the regular coach. The thing is that for the domestic flights, they treat it just like a coach ticket. But you do have to pay extra for the more room than coach, the premium seating. But still a lot cheaper than booking in first class. And so on my trip out to L.A. this past summer, I went ahead and booked that flight going out, and then coming back, I used miles. I used one-way miles, like 25,000 miles, and I was able to book first class, but I had to go through Vegas, so it would be LAX, McCarran, Philadelphia, and then on to Salisbury. But still, I was able to fly in first on the way back, and that was on miles. So that's what we got there. So yeah, so my decision. I mean, I'm still planning right as of right now. I am still a go for NAB. I am just I'm taking this every day, and if American Airlines does give an opportunity to make a change for us that we're unfairly treated here, then perhaps I may go ahead and cancel this year and go next year, and then maybe use that credit and go somewhere else, Southern California or somewhere, I don't know. Of course, I don't want to leave Eva home too long, alone too much. So, so those are the things that those are the things that we've got to deal with here, and such. Now, again, that of course brings up the question of the NAB, and of course, if the NAB decides to cancel, yeah, then I've got to make changes, and if I'm out $200, so be it. But of course, right now the NAB. The NAB, this would put the NAB conference in so much of a disarray. I mean, not as much of a disarray if they were to cancel the Olympics. Like there's been talk about canceling the Olympics in Tokyo over this whole thing. And so the question is where do we go? That's something we gotta take into consideration. Maybe the summer, summer's coming. We need, I've told Eva, we got to maybe go on a road trip up into New England, up into upstate New York again. Maybe we'll visit Ricky on his home turf. We got to go through Springfield, Massachusetts, because there's a really good prime rib restaurant there. Anyway, back to the business. The FCC has released their own policy on the coronavirus, and this is basically what their policies have to deal with right now, is that anybody who has been to China, Iran, Italy, or South Korea in the past 14 days cannot enter the FCC headquarters. And that is even kind of extended to employees and contractors. So yeah, if you've been in any of those countries in the past 14 days, the FCC wants you to stay home. And also, this is the big one too. The FCC is suspending until further notice any non-critical domestic or international travel, and suspending involvement in non-critical large gatherings involving participants from around the country and around the world. Gee, I wonder what that could include. NAB? Perhaps also Dayton. The other one is Dayton Hamvention. Dayton Hamvention is going to be coming up here this summer. So the question is how many, who's going to pull out, who exhibitors especially, what exhibitors are going to pull out of Dayton over all this? So, right now we're just kind of in a wait and see, at least here in North America, we're kind of in the wait and see. I feel like there are fewer Chinese vendors that go to NAB than there are that go to Dayton. Fewer Asian-based, from the, and I'm only saying that because that's the region, that's the hotbed for everything in here, especially when you got travel bans from South Korea and other places, and such, and you got organizations and that obviously if the FCC doesn't want anyone who's been in South Korea in the past 14 days of visiting headquarters, so obviously there's some concerns there, and and of course it's for it's what are the risks. And I think that's what everybody needs to take into consideration. Also, too, is this just mere paranoia? I am open to the fact that this is, that those that theorize that that COVID-19 is nothing more than is mainly just the flu on a little bit of steroids. Flu 2.0. Some people have equated it that way, and so the big question is, where do we go or not? Obviously we still got just a little bit over a month to make that decision. And honestly, the sooner I know, the better. So that way I can plan accordingly. We're gonna go to a cherry blossom event this year in DC, and we decided not to. and we decided to cancel because of everything going on. It was just too. It was an unnecessary risk. I'm willing to go to NAB solo and assume a little bit of risk. Eva's a little more vulnerable from a health perspective than I am, so I'd be more concerned about her being in public places with large gatherings and such right now than I would be. But of course, the other thing too is I don't want to bring something home. That can be taken a couple ways. Wow, 12:16. Okay, we're an hour and 15 minutes into this. We're almost done. So we've talked about a lot of stuff here. Renewals. We've talked about the all digital AM. We talked about the concept of wide FM. We talked about the coronavirus. Of course, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And it doesn't have to be these topics. Throw anything at me. You know, anything that I'm that's within my subject matter realm. But throw anything at me. We'll come up with something here, and so we're going to do that. But right now, it's been raining here in Riverton. Last year, if you've been following me on Facebook, if you've been following REC on Facebook, last year, we got a couple turkeys, and we're talking, and we went out to this farm in Delaware. Got turkeys. We got a pair. And while we were driving home with the turkeys in the back of the car, they were in cages, of course, we were discussing names for the turkeys. We normally don't name our livestock, especially our hens, but we came up with we had a female and a male turkey. So the female turkey was easy. We just named her Jenny O, after the brand name. And as I was driving through Georgetown, Delaware, getting ready to go through that little traffic circle in the middle of town, it suddenly hit me what the name of the male turkey was going to be. Les Nessman. God is my witness. I thought turkeys could fly, with good old Arthur Carlson and the, and then Les Nessman and the WKRP turkey drop and all that. Anyway, over this past year, what happens when you get a male turkey and a female turkey together? Well, certain things happen that you should already know about. Eggs get laid, eggs get sat on, chicks get hatched. Well, we have 3 of those. We still have 3 of those turkeys that came from that batch. Some of them did run off, which turkeys are known to do because they're more like a game bird. They've got a wild streak in them more than than your average chicken. And so we had to come up with names for them. Now we still have 2 males and 1 female. The female is tiny. So Eva named her turkey sandwich, little tiny turkey. So small. It's like a little turkey sandwich, But we got names for the 2 male turkeys. I came up with those, and we are carrying on the Les Nessman tradition. We carried on the Les Nessman tradition. So with that, we have 2 new turkeys. We have 2 younger turkeys right now, still growing up. And so let me introduce you to Dr. Johnny Fever and Booger. Yeah, there you go. Dr. Johnny Fever and Booger. Just took those pictures this morning. It was raining this morning, so we don't see these birds in their poofed up, fluffed up glory. So, but there they are. That's Dr. Johnny Fever and Booger. Our 2 other male turkeys. Les Nessman is still alive and well. So there we go. Again, final chance for questions before I close this thing up. I can hear the rain outside. Yeah, it's currently raining in Riverton. right, going once, going twice. I'm going to be looking for myself, coming back here on the guitar, going once, going twice. And you know the system held that comment. I'm going to show that one. Yes. Yeah, that's right. And you know, and this is in the context of, yeah, there was a you saw the rooster in the background there. Yeah, you know, this is this came out of a conversation that Ricky and I were having. This actually, we talked about this last week with Cock FM. Uh, oh yeah, so you're all you know, too dirty. Anyway, for those of you who have not subscribed to this channel, please do so. For those of you who are still left. And I have not seen any new comments, any questions come in. So with that, I will close out here. And I'm not sure where we're going to be next week yet. What else is coming up here? The FCC meeting, there's no agenda yet. But that's going to be on... that's not until the 31st of March. So we got a little ways out until the FCC meeting this month. I don't know what's on the agenda yet. We normally get the agenda 3 weeks earlier. There is a slight rumor out there that 19193 may be on the agenda. I'm not sure. Again, I can't confirm that nor deny it. We need to push 19193. I think we're going to do another ex parte push, focusing only on LP250 and on translator relief and nothing else. This is way too important to be set to the side again. There have been changed circumstances since the last time the FCC has reviewed this, and we need to make sure that this gets on. Please contact your senators, congresspeople, and have them write to Chairman Pai and ask why this was tentatively rejected. That's what you can do. We'll do what we can. Till then, sayonara, minasan.